Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We just saw the address of the caretaker Prime Minister Anwar Saab as he addressed the 78th UN General Assembly session. Of course, he talked about certain key issues, one being, of course, climate change. He talked about regional global security, of there being the importance of ensuring peace within the region. He also talked about Afghanistan, Palestine, of course, remaining very close to Pakistan's heart and its violations there as far as Kashmir is concerned. That is also something that the Prime Minister spoke about, the violations there, and also the fact that Pakistan does not believe in elitism. He was categorically saying this. We'll be talking about all of this, what the Prime Minister said today, the territorial integrity of Pakistan, all these issues laid out by the Prime Minister today in his address, 78th address to the UN General Assembly. With us, we have today Munir Ahmed, who's a climate change expert, also an IR expert. Thank you for being with us today. We have with us Salim, who is an IR expert. Thank you for joining us today. Farooq Patafi, who's an anchor with PTV World, also an international relations expert. Thank you for being with us today. Ji, Munir Saab, you heard what the Prime Minister said, and of course, you know, the main issues he highlighted, one of them being the climate damage, the reparation, the fact that we have suffered so much at the hands of it. We'll be talking about other issues also, but overall, how do you look at the speech and, you know, the highlighted parts of it as far as the Prime Minister is concerned?
Thank you so much. Prime Minister's speech definitely is very well balanced, and it contains all the issues that we have been putting up to the world. And once again, very forcefully, Prime Minister Anwar presented the same thing. And unfortunately, if we talk about the regional and global security, the new Cold War is just next door. And for the last about 2 years, the world powers are pursuing such kind of new Cold War strategies. They have disrupted the regional peace, and global peace is also at stake.
Geopolitics versus geoeconomics is what he
geoeconomics. And the geopolitical situation has affected the geoeconomic position. And we are at the verge of food security as well. On the other hand, 190 billion plus have been invested in Ukraine on the over the military interventions they have. And if those 190 plus billion dollars have been invested into loss and damage fund, or like to the green climate fund, that would have changed the destiny of all the vulnerable countries.
Right.
But that is quite unfortunate that the global powers, they have a different agenda, what they commit in at the global forums.
And that's what I want to come to, that he specifically said that Pakistan looks forward to the commitments that were made, you know, as far as climate reparation were concerned, for those to be honored. Waqas, you heard what the Prime Minister said. Do you think, I mean, it was very impactful, but overall, you know, what are some of the main, you know, highlights, you would say?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me. I guess his speech, if we see, it is also an indication of global problems the world global system is confronted with. The political institutions, the economic issues, and particularly how the entire global order is confronted with. The challenges, those are actually created by the countries, those who should have been more responsible and responsive to the problems that they have created, sadly. I guess the key, I guess, is I like the idea that when we say that these all geoeconomics actually is, if it's decided by geopolitics and your interest, then it's very difficult to have the agenda fulfilled, particularly the sustainable development goals, because you have a shared agenda agreed by the committee of international committee and the people. With the view that we live in a world which has a shared future. So the problem right now is that if your geopolitics dominates the interest and it decides the direction of SDGs, then it's very critical. Now, I guess the fundamental thing that I infer from this is that, the goal number 16 of peace, justice, and strong institutions, particularly if we see the entire the speech revolves around that. The problem right now is that you can't have goal number 15, 16, 13, 14 until unless you don't work on peace, justice, and development. The problem right now is that world is too, focused towards the very issues like creating blocks and based on certain interest and, sort of the division between global south and north. I guess this is an indication that world must invest and need to know about the creating peaceful, just, and strong and stable institutions based on certain principles. Like he talked about multilateralism, we talked about equity, justice, and sovereignty. These are important concepts, but the problem right now is that the countries' politics and the relationship between two countries is actually they hold more power and value, and then the United Nations guiding them. The problem, if you see the outgoing president, if you see his speech when he was leaving the office by 77th, I guess, session, in the previous one, he hinted about sort of bringing in change in the global system of decision making. Like, you can't have that institutions, structures built on after World War II, and then you can't sustain in 2023 or this modern era. So the question is, of course, he said that about the expansion of UNSC. Of course, it has its own context, but we need to see that until unless you don't create a share of this global south into decision-making bodies based on these principles that you've agreed, and you can't move and progress. So that's a fundamental challenge right now. I guess the world is waiting, and I guess he rightly mentioned.
But he seems to have stressed on these goals, and also even earlier on, before the speech, he said that only 12% of your sustainable goals have been met overall. And the speech also talked about parity between different nations, and the fairness of it overall. Do you agree with as far as the way that the Prime Minister illustrated this, as far as blocks are concerned, as far as again geoeconomics, being overridden by, to an extent, geopolitics?
I will thank you very much, Mahrukh. I will say that I agree totally with whatever was said. First things first, it was a very well constructed speech. It was very well delivered speech. And remember, let me remind your viewers as well that at that time when it was being planned, there was this debate in Islamabad whether caretaker Prime Minister should go there and deliver the speech or not. At that time, there was no way to understand that India would actually self-destruct itself and score such a magnificent own goal that the entire world will suddenly become receptive to what Pakistan had to say, right? So it was a lucky break, it was a good call. The Prime Minister was there in the room and he delivered, articulated all the concerns that Pakistan has, particularly, as you pointed out, SDGs and environment or climate, but also regarding regional peace, because we have been telling the world that India is impossible, and nobody was believing us. All of a sudden, Canada actually experienced that, and the Western world is now exactly seeing how difficult or impossible India can be. So I think that it was a very opportune time that the Prime Minister spoke there. And as you pointed out, that it is important to remember that UN is a body which essentially is a democratic body, and which essentially emphasizes on justice among nations. So parity, equality, equity, these are values which are very important. And I thought that the Prime Minister did a tremendous job of presenting that case as well. But I wanted to actually also mention the UNSC bit, because India keeps on trying to lobby for a permanent seat there. There are other countries as well. But Pakistan is part of a very active group called the Coffee Group, right? That is not all. Pakistan also has been emphasizing something that even the US now actually buys, that instead of adding more permanent members, you should have rotating members, and their number will ensure that every country, every bloc is actually represented here. Right now, I think that there is this concept that the world order is still emerging. I wouldn't call it actually a world order, I would call it a world in disarray. But I think that there's always the possibility of UN actually asserting its role for collective security, where rather than fighting each other, we can actually get together and ensure that there is a common interest to ensure that all human beings survive, regardless of nations or boundaries or civilization or whatever you have. So today I think I'm very happy that the Prime Minister actually made my case there. Kashmir was mentioned, Afghanistan was, and TTP was mentioned. So all those areas that needed to be addressed were addressed by the Prime Minister.
Munir sir, let's talk about this, the climate change particularly. The fact that, of course, the Prime Minister said that he's hopeful that those commitments that were made would be honored. Overall, the effect of this, it's not only during the speech, but even before, the Prime Minister has been talking about reparation. He's been talking about the fact how, the responsibility that we bear is huge, and, us being less than 1% emitters of carbon fuel, all of that. The fact that it is now a huge issue for the world, and to take it up like this, how do you overall look at it?
In fact, even another COP will be coming in from November and December, like we will be negotiating again the same things. But unfortunately, what the global leaders agreed in the last COP is not still the agenda is pending, and as I mentioned, loss and damage fund was not could not come to the shape that we were expecting. Meanwhile, what the world pledged for the disastrous mitigation in Pakistan, that was $38 billion loss. But unfortunately, a very low portion of the pledges have been materialized, and that is really worrisome for us. The countries, the other African countries, they are also facing the brunt of climate change. And if we come to the South Asian countries, we are also, the South Asian countries, they have so much losses because of the climate change. But the priority of the world leaders, that is totally different from what the commitments make at the global level and to the developing countries. At the moment, the African countries are suffering from the food shortage. Even the European countries, they have a shortage of food because of their investments in the war. So they are flaring up the conflicts between the countries and in the regions that have been producing like 23–24% of the staple food.
Right.
So priorities have to be changed, and the global leaders, they have to take their pledges very seriously. It is not a joke that if you make a commitment at the global forum or with the countries like Pakistan, and if they are not fulfilled. And Prime Minister has very diligently expressed concerns, and I believe like the rising the high interest rates is also one major problem with the countries.
I'm going to go to Shazia Anwer, who is also an IR expert. Shazia, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mahrukh.
Shazia, overall, the address of the Prime Minister, we're talking about, of course, one of the things, climate damage, climate reparation, those are there. But also, if we talk about religious intolerance, things like, of course, he talked about Afghanistan, he talked about Palestine also. And the fact that Pakistan believes in ensuring peace, it believes in there being regional peace. But of course, what we have at the end of the day, the kind of deal that we have as far as the region again is concerned. What are your thoughts on this main part of the Prime Minister's speech?
I think, Mahrukh, Prime Minister has discussed all the important issues, starting from Kashmir, the human rights violation in Indian occupied Kashmir, their citizen status, their genocide, continuous genocide, their demographic changes. So starting from that, they also touched very slightly the Hindutva mentality and the impact of that Hindutva mentality on the region. He did not primarily discuss the recent issue, but it is also very important, and that's also the West is facing. That's also the West is actually now materializing that how this Hinduism mentality is working. So he also discussed about the cross-border terrorism, state-sponsored cross-border terrorism by India, and that will augment the impression because we as a nation, time and again, reiterating the fact that India is involved in cross-border state terrorism in Balochistan, in Kashmir. But now the first time West is experiencing it, so that will definitely amplify our perspective, our provided claimed fact, which we are saying time and again that India is involved in state terrorism, cross-border state terrorism. So that point was very important for me, and Prime Minister categorically mentioned that point, that again the Afghanistan issue, it was also very important to mention that he again asked the world to help the Afghanis, to not leave them alone. Apart from the recent and Afghan situation, so we are still with Afghanistan.
He mentions the women and children and the impact that they shoulder most of all, out of all this. They're the victims.
Exactly, and we cannot leave them alone. So apart from the situation, apart from the Taliban diplomatic norms, what they are discussing with us and what they are demanding from us and what they are doing with us particularly, we have the firm stance that we are not going to leave our Afghan brothers and sisters alone in this time of need. So that was also in the agenda, and again he reiterated that Pakistan is always there to help to facilitate the world peace operations, and it will help United Nations in the future for all the future peace operations wherever it is required. So we will always be there, and we will not tolerate any type of terrorism, any type of racial discrimination, and any type of religious terrorism. So, and the future of the world is based on harmony and acceptance. So I enjoyed his speech personally. He discussed almost all the topics which were supposed to be, which were in my mind that these should be. Even he discussed our the sustainable development goals, Mahrukh. The other colleague was talking about the pledges. So pledges are not supposed to be the checks. They cannot come the next day. So you have to provide a proper framework, and that framework has to be a sustainable development goal-based. So he also reaffirmed that our policy is now based on sustainable goals, and now we are looking forward for the global financial transformations. It has to be different for the developing countries and the developed countries. And
I think that's very important. I think that's very important. Let me come back to you, Shazia, on this. Vikas, you know, I think the fact, again, it comes down to parity and it comes down to equality, which is what Patafi Saab was also earlier talking about. The question of there being, it should be different. The pendulum, the way it swings in one direction shouldn't be the same if it swings as far as developed and undeveloped countries go, and what they owe to the world in this regard.
See, you are also witnessing the impacts of it. I mean, the widening gap between the countries who are wealthy, and then of course the countries who are not to that level, and of course they are grappling with issues which are intense and complex. So of course this sort of uneven, unjust development, I must say, in the world has also its own repercussions, and of course they are written. I mean, you can't. You would have the impact, of course, if you are living in developed world or developing world, like the climate and other things. So it's a shared globe, what we say, then with a shared future. See, there are two important things I want to mention when it comes to. I mean, one of the important thing which he said is about the Pakistan's is located at a region which is least integrated. I guess this is a potential, an opportunity, what he was trying to tell and to say the world that look. It's an approach of Pakistan to have a more regional integration, but of course this integration has some prerequisites to it. That the onus of responsibility lies to the countries, those who are deeply involved in the conflicts or the unjust things like issue of Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, the region like India, Pakistan, China, having almost more than 1/3 of the population, I mean, has a huge potential. But of course, this is the test case for the international world, and particularly the institutions like UN, that, you know, if you want to advance these SDGs goals, you have to create an enabling environment. You have to create, you know, this environment based on some value system, which is just, equitable and all that. The problem right now is if your geopolitics and your economic interest actually drives and are the key indicators for you and shapes these value systems. That's a very dangerous thing, and that's happening. Second, I must say, important thing when you say that, of course, the needs and have developed and developing countries are different. Importantly, you know, the challenges to SDGs collectively, if we see, for the developing world is, of course, it has the implementation challenges, it has political will challenges, and it has also governance challenges. Now, the idea is that, for example, on climate change, the problem right now is that we need, instead of this funding and all these things, we need to see that how we can build our capacities. The problem with us is that how our local infrastructure have to be enabled. Of course, it requires a lot of funding, but of course, it also requires a lot of technical expertise. Pakistan's problems, of course, in this regard, not only one climate change and other SDGs, is about their capacities. How you can build a nation that has capacity to overcome these challenges. That is the area where he needs to focus further. He is in US, Pakistan. He other day mentioned that Pakistan has more than 7 decades relation with US. Of course, this is the area where we need to see that how we can build those capacities, particularly infrastructure capacities to dealing up when it comes to climate, may it be mitigation or may it be adaptation. I guess this is the key area where developed world should transfer not only their financial resources, but also technical and other capacities, so that we can build a society and we can come up with our own indigenous world and solution.
Right, but
that is the key thing,
I
guess.
But Abhisab, those are, you know, these are the themes of what was said in the speech today, has been what he's earlier been saying in different meetings also.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, in terms of our relationship with other countries, in terms of there being no blocks now, in terms of there being, you know, Pakistan wanting peace, in terms of there being equality, all of those things. But what do you feel is the most important thread as far as, you know, the speech as a whole is concerned?
Right. I think that the most important thread or aspect is essentially about Pakistan's economics and the kind of consequences that conflicts actually bring. Prime Minister actually talked about three major shocks to the system, right? Food, finance, and fuel. But there are other things as well. Earlier, we were talking about connectivity, right? So the entire region is ready to connect, Mahrukh. There's only one. Usually it is said that bull in China shop. I'm going to amend that. I'm going to call it elephant in the China shop, right? Literally. That refuses to cooperate, and that is India. So it was very important to highlight why India is doing it and how impossible India is. So Pakistan did actually underscore that as well. I think that if there is connectivity, our economy, India's economy and regional economy can really prosper. Regarding another aspect that perhaps was not discussed so far, Islamophobia. In Islamophobia, usually there are two threads that different kind of people actually focus on. The hardliners actually focus only on the infrastructure, like attack on mosques, symbols and all that. And then there is the issue of actually human suffering because of Islamophobia, the way people are profiled, racial profiling and other things actually take place. It was very commendable of the Prime Minister to actually emphasize the human element also, because that shows how Muslim communities all over the world, especially in India and various other places, is suffering, right? This is second thing that is important. Regarding economics also, inflation. The way inflationary shocks have been coming to the system, especially because of Ukraine war, and since as was pointed out, both these countries actually produce a substantial part of world grain. So sub-Saharan Africa is suffering. Our region has started suffering as well. Other countries will suffer also. It is important to keep on reminding people that you have to go back to sanity. If you are not going there, then we are really lost.
And I think I'm going to go to Shazia, but what extremism does and the way and what it perpetuates and what it leads to, I think a case in point are the recent events that have happened. You know, in Canada also, and overall the way that we are, Shazia, the way that, you know, we've seen things transpire, and I guess India expose itself to the world. Isn't that true?
Yes, of course. And the first time, as I have told earlier, that India has exposed to the extent that now West is saying, and West is reiterating the words we use, that India is involved in cross-border state terrorism, because Justin Trudeau categorically mentioned that our agencies got an idea that Indian agencies. So it's good enough to get an idea what he wanted to say. So if the religion and minority religious beliefs are not safe even outside the border, extremist borders, so where else they can be saved? And if the state machinery and the state agencies are utilized to hunt them down, what else we need to rectify this? What else we need for us to give us a wake up call? I mean, how can we say that this can go on if you cannot leave people in peace thousands of kilometers away? And that person which was killed, it was a very affluent citizen. It was a very useful, in a sense that he was in a community service, and he has no problem with his social or religious conduct, and he was gunned down in front of a religious place. And it is the reality that India is involved in that. So it is a wake-up call for all of us that this hatred toward the minorities and the other religions have no limit, and it can be catastrophic sometimes. It can be way more dangerous what we can imagine.
It certainly has a spillover effect, which is what the case in point illustrates as far as this recent issue is concerned. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have, but we will of course continue to discuss the Prime Minister's speech later on in other programs and the significance of it. Thank you so much for being with us. Munir Ahmed Saab, thank you for being with us. Waqas Salim Saab, thank you for joining us. Farooq Vatafi Saab, thank you for being with us today. Shazia Anwer Cheema, thank you for your valuable input. Of course, as far as the speech is concerned, it was very succinct, it was very comprehensive. It highlighted the main issues Pakistan is facing, of course, climate change, equality, parity, peace in the region, our relationship with Afghanistan, Palestine, also overall other countries as far as and the fact that I will again say, I think it's significant that the Prime Minister said that Pakistan does not believe in elitism. And I think that in the world of today, it's very important for all countries with the power to do so to ensure that kind of equality and that kind of parity. Thank you so much for joining us today on Personal.